says how we are going to be working on this aspect, which, as we know, is key for our region, but not only for our region, but for the sustainability of our planet. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome to stage Ashram Showmaker, who is going to be talking about the ecological or environmental sustainability. So, thank you very much for joining us today. And then we're going to have a Minister of Environment with us.
Private sector. Now, why do I say it's becoming increasingly important for the private sector? I think we all know, and we have seen it even in the introductory video here, and we have seen it in the this excellent CAF introductory video we saw this morning. This is a biodiversity-rich region of the world. This is one of your great economic strengths, is your biodiversity, your nature, and then what you do with this nature, how you invest on it, how you build on it, how you can benefit from it. Now, conferences of the parties of these international conventions, they set in place global targets. They provide roadmaps of where the journey is going. The 3 Rio conventions dealing with climate change, biodiversity loss, and desertification, and the other conventions that we have on pollution, they address a triple planetary crisis that has become an existential crisis. A crisis that can only be resolved if we do not address it in silos, but also, and we in the UN call this an all-of-society approach, it can also only be addressed if we all pull together, roll up our sleeves and work together. And that means governments must take action, they make commitments, they must lead, but the private sector, of course, must come in. And these COPs present enormous opportunities for the private sector to come and understand where the journey is going, what are the commitments made, how will they be implemented, where are the opportunities for investment, but where are also your responsibilities in how you conduct your business. The importance of the private sector, I want to say again, cannot be overestimated, and I'm not saying that because I'm talking here to a private sector audience. The private sector has a lot to contribute, and I want to be clear, we're not looking at you only as a source of funding, not even mainly as a source of funding. We're looking at you in particular for your innovative potential. And this has been mentioned, was like a red thread all morning. The innovative capacity of this region of the world is tremendous. And we need that innovation, that technology to come to scale and to put to a purpose. What is innovation about a purpose? We need innovation to be focused on sustainability. What does that mean in practice? It means innovation that focuses on providing solutions to the climate crisis and to the biodiversity and pollution crisis the planet is facing. And the best way to put solutions forward is to understand that the biodiversity and the climate crisis are not two separate crises, but they are closely interlinked. And there's a whole range of solutions, and these are the best solutions because they make every dollar go further, every peso go further. These are so-called nature-based solutions, where you would invest in nature, not only for the sake of nature, but also to produce solutions for climate change. Now, the COPs of the Climate Convention are well known. The whole world follows and listens. Heads of state come and speak. The Biodiversity Convention is a little bit less known, but the Biodiversity Convention as well has made a huge step forward in 2022 in Montreal, when the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted. This is generally called the Paris Agreement for Nature. It's a very ambitious agreement that looks to 2050 and the vision of living in harmony with nature, and puts in place 23 action targets by 2030, which are this kind of roadmap, a plan of action. How will we achieve this vision of living in harmony with nature? And the framework is very clear. We have to see biodiversity in a much broader context than before. Sure, it is about protecting areas. It is about protecting nature and restoring nature, both on land and at sea. And we have ambitious targets, 30% by 2030. Absolutely clear. But what happens in the other 70%? How do we make all economic activities sustainable? How do you put in your mindsets that when a business does its investment, it needs to look, yes, at emissions, but also at the impacts on nature, on biodiversity, on ecosystem services, on water, and all the rest of it? These are crucial questions. And on these crucial questions, the conferences of the parties provide directions and can give you a sense of how you should orient your work. Now, this integrated approach, I want to say it again, provides first and foremost an enormous opportunity for private sector investment. But to capitalize on this opportunity, I think a lot more work is needed, and I want to be very honest about that. These things are there, but we need to work with parties, and we will hear the Minister in a minute speak to you. We need to work with parties so that at the country level, the right incentives are being put in place, the right enabling conditions are there to foster these investment in nature-positive solutions, which is one term that industry very frequently uses, climate neutral and nature-positive solutions. Now, to further accelerate private sector agreement, we must prioritize the creation of financial incentives. These can be green bonds. We've seen carbon markets in the climate sphere. There are tax credits for companies, for example, that could contribute to sustainable projects. During COP16 in Cali, Colombia, just a few months ago, we heard about new innovative financial solutions also in this space of nature and biodiversity. Again, green bonds, biodiversity credit schemes. Lots of questions still around these schemes. Potentially a lot of promise, probably also a strong need for guardrails so that these promises can actually be fulfilled. And we also heard a lot about the need for blended finance. And again, that brings in this government, whole of society conversation that we need to have. Investments in biodiversity are often perceived as high-risk investments because they're not so well known. So whether or not they will actually yield benefits and profits is not so clear in the minds of many, even though, and UNEP, I work for the United Nations Environment Programme, we are a science-based organization. I can throw lots of figures at your head that in so many areas, nature-based solutions have an investment ratio of 1 to 8. You invest $1 for $8 of profit. But this is not well known, and in order to accelerate and generate such investments, we are looking also to the conferences of the parties to tell the parties to please put in place more enabling mechanisms, more blended finance, so that the government can take up part of the risk investment. I want to mention one more important thing. COP16 in Cali was in many ways a groundbreaking success, in particular when it came to the integration of the views and the knowledge, traditional knowledge and capacities of indigenous peoples and local communities. We have a new work program, a new subsidiary body to better leverage what they can tell us about how we work with nature and how we work with climate. But we also put in place a new finance mechanism, the Cali Fund. It was operationalized in Cali, and we're aiming to open the fund for investment in about 4 or 5 weeks. That makes me slightly nervous, but we're aiming to do that. Now, what is this fund about? Companies in many sectors, biotechnology, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, cosmetics, use digital sequencing information, digital information on genetic resources for their businesses. They build their business success on this digital information that they can access for free from public libraries in order to create products such as cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, etc. But they don't give back. And the whole idea of the Cali Fund is to put in place this new mechanism whereby companies that build their business models on nature give back to nature. This is a fundamental mindset shift that I hope we can all promote together, and we're really looking forward to the first companies coming on board and paying into this fund, and I'm very happy to stay afterwards here and explain the modalities, and of course we're looking at governments to put in place the right incentives for that. So these were just a few snapshots on what COPs do, why COPs matter for you, but I want to say you matter for us in the COPs. So it is about all of society coming together. There was no better example than the COP16 in Cali, the COP de la Gente. It had an amazing mobilization of the private sector, finance sector, business, educators, agriculture. Everybody came together, having a conversation how we can work to better protect our nature for the sake of nature, but also for the sake of our economies, our health and well-being. And maybe in conclusion, make no mistake, nature is beautiful to look at and nowhere more than here in this region. But we call this forum here the Davos for Latin America. Well, look at what the people in Davos are saying. The World Economic Forum cannot tire to remind us that the risks to nature are amongst the top risks that enterprises see for their business in a midterm perspective for the next 10 years. 4 out of 10 risks are nature risks. 44 trillion of the global economy depend on healthy nature. That's half of our economies. So it is time for all of us to recognize it and to invest. It's time for governments to stretch out the hand to industry, work together and identify how they can help you. And it's time for industry to take up its responsibility. Thank you so much for listening.
Gracias a Astrid, secretaria ejecutiva del Convenio sobre la Diversidad Biológica. Ahora quiero presentar al señor ministro de Ambiente de Panamá, a Juan Carlos Navarro, que también se va a dirigir con nosotros en esta charla que estamos hoy hablando, y luego vamos a abrir un panel sobre la nueva era de la filantropía empresarial y la medición de su
the new age of philanthropy and the measurement of its impact nowadays. So we'll now like to welcome our minister from Cali to Belém, a key stakeholder in the global climate crisis. Mr. Minister, please be welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. For those of you who would like to listen to our interpretation, it would be in channel 0 for the translation. And I think you can hear me with or without the microphone. But first of all, I'd like to start by saying that this reminds me, every COP always reminds me, Rome and Nero while Rome was in flames. Scientists and environmentalists are trying to look for different ways to find a solution to the climate crisis that we're going through today. While some others continue to destroy the world, this is of high concern to see there's in terms of this total lack of urgency at every single level, private and public sector, even from those people coming to these COPs. And actually, I was telling someone that people actually do incredible agreements just to save biodiversity. But the reality is what we saw in Cali last year, that even though we have our best will to save the planet, we can only go that so far. But in order to change our world, we need to change the way we vote, because all countries can be in agreement to actually switch a comma in an agreement. So we need to come to different sort of agreements in such way that is efficient. So for example, whenever we have the voting of 2/3 uh, of the total voters. So that's why we need to be more practical in terms of how we use this common sense, our common sense. And this is what we're missing at the global level as well, this common sense. And common sense is telling us that we're losing our planet away. For example, in countries such as Panama, that is negative carbon, have already lost a very important portion of their territorial waters. Countries such as Panama, that lead in many different instances the different regional efforts for the sake of the environment, we are not contributing by being carbon negative. We're not contributing to the climate change, but all the contrary. And the same could be said for the Caribbean countries and our country itself that are very rich in biodiversity. We are negative carbon again, but we are the first to receive the consequences of the irresponsibility, of the lack of responsibility of some other countries that unfortunately are not leading the efforts to come to an agreements that would help us out to face this problem. Uh, just to give you an example, last year here in Panama and the year before, we had a crisis of a drought. We have a drought crisis in which we lost about 1,000 million of dollars in our Panama channel. That is so well known nowadays. So $1,000 million for a country such as ours is a fortune. However, the climate crisis and this drought that we had didn't enable us to have enough water for this wonderful example of sustainable development, whose banks are creating or produce the water they need. However, that problem a couple of months later in October or November, we had the opposite situation. We had some floods in this very same region where we had multiple casualties that may toll to 250 million dollars, given the floods that we have. So welcome to the new reality. The climate change is a fact. However, the solutions are not as effective as I wish they were. There is a sense of, is there a sense of urgency? Of course, there is none. We're all busy traveling to different conferences. We're all busy going to receptions. We are all busy having these discussions amongst environmentalists or scientists or even entrepreneurs. But there is no agreement and we're not coming to solutions. Panama right now is posing, just to get started, that instead of having three COPs, this climate change, biodiversity, and certification, instead of having three of them, we are proposing to have a single one: less carbon emissions, less accumulated points for our frequent travelers, which I understand it is a profession, or at least it is within our profession. So going to this conference of the parties, it has become a profession. Attending all of these meetings is a profession. I do understand, but we need to have a more streamlined communication. We need to have streamlined solutions. So that's why our proposal is to have a single conference where we can discuss all of this instead of having multiple ones. My second recommendation is to come to terms with our reality. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that we are going to decrease our temperature in 1.5 centigrades. That's a lie because we have already passed that point long ago. Let's say that that's a lost battle so far. Please do not believe that we're going to be able to go back to that point because part of what we're going through right now is the result of irreversible changes, and especially with the biodiversity, that's the way it goes. If we're not going to be able to commit to this 1.5 centigrades right now, it is the time to commit to new objectives, and we need to have an urgency to reach those objectives. The same thing is going on with biodiversity. What we need now are some specific proposals. We don't need any more conferences. We don't need any more of this because our conference, even though they're very well led by Astrid and her team, to whom we support, it is very difficult to achieve these specific agreements. And what has happened with funding and the funding commitments, or let's say the no funding, let's say, commitments that we achieved in Cali, uh, is the same thing that is going to, it is the same thing that is going on right now. So for those people who are going to go to Belém, we're not going to find any single available room. So we need to come to certain commitments in order to fight the situation. So the climate changes that we see in our hemisphere and in our world is telling us that right now it is a more popular, that this is a more popular fight. We're going steadily towards the risk, but people are asking us to speed it up. We're running out of time. If we really want to face this climate change, we need to do two very easy things. We need to work out on very easy concepts, and we need to stop destroying our forests, our oceans, and our biodiversity. Very simple concepts. You don't have to go to Belém, or you don't have to go to COP16 in Cali, as I did, but you can do it yourself. Please stop destroying the forest in your country and go back to work. We need to preserve our forests. That's not something that is going to happen in any COP, but that's something that you do back in each of your countries. So that's what we're doing here in Panama. We're we're telling people to go back to the forest, to save those forests, to save and to preserve our forests, our oceans. Again, 54% of our territorial ocean and 35% of our territory that is being protected, it is protected in natural reserves. Many of them are of global importance and they are acknowledged by UNESCO. If we want these UNESCO sites not to become these paleontologist museums, we need to, first of all, go back to our countries to look after our forests. And second of all, which is a very simple concept as well, we know what the energy, the clean energy, clean, renewable energy is all about. So we need to dramatically accelerate the evolution towards that clean energy. So those are the two steps that we need to move forward to. First of all, protect our environment, to protect our nature, and to accelerate the process with clean energies. And my main takeaway today for you is to enjoy these last conferences, because I'm sure we're going to have a couple of them, but I know that the quality of life is going to change because the climate change and this climate crisis is going to become more and more brutal. The loss of human lives is going to become more traffic, and the wildfires are going to be more dramatic, such as the one that we have here in Guacamayas, or such as the one in California, or the one in Greece. Or you tell me, what's your favorite country? So whether we stop this now, or or we have to switch it up. What is it?
So, what is it that some of us come here to share our opinion or do our job? If in the private sector there's not like an intimate connection, the private sector, citizens, individuals, mass media, companies, businesses, NGOs, environmental groups, the philanthropics, we all have to work in coordination to stop this. If we don't do it, we won't succeed. That's why I liked the emphasis that I had today with people in CAF. I mean, wonderful job focusing on the cooperation between the private and public sectors. This is key. The public sector may help to create the conditions, but in depth, it's us, the free individuals, those who believe in freedom and those who believe in responsible action of individuals who are going to be able to change the world, in particular the private sector in each one of our countries. When the private sector, together with the public sector, the one that I'm representing today, together with all the forces of society, when we work together to face this, we will succeed. For now, we in Panama will preserve as much as we can of the nature surrounding us. We will work restlessly on that, obsessed with protecting life and all the living beings around us until our death. Everything we can do, we are going to do it, and we're going to do it, and we're doing it. And this is this obsessive work that I hope that each one of us can do in our countries, or we won't make it. Welcome to Panama. Enjoy not only the conference, of course, I hope you enjoy, but I hope you have a time to see the natural wonders of Panama, without which we couldn't exist in this country. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much for those words. And we will take you on the word of enjoying Panama. Some executive Sonja Jeeves, the Chief of Sustainable Funding of the International Funding Systems, Nadia, the Genius Manager of Sustainability and Climate Change of EY, and with us today also Juan Carlos Navarro, the Minister of the Environment of Panama, Alicia Montalvo, the manager, and by Positive Biodiversity of CAF, that is going to help moderate this space. So thank you very much. And I don't know if we can give them a plus, and a plus. And thank you everybody for remaining here. Go ahead, Alicia. Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you very much for attending this panel, and thank you very much, Minister Navarro, for his inspiring words, or the prior speakers, because exactly what we wanted to do in this panel is to understand to what extent all the efforts that are being carried out, both in terms of the international negotiations and in the countries, in particular here in Panama, are giving the right signs to bring private investment. So that's why we are here with different representatives that come from the private sector, but some of them have had some experience in the government sector. But in the end, like the Minister Navarro said, this forum is a forum about how to work together with the private sector. And in this moment, that somehow all the aspects related to climate change are being discussed, controverted, and being used for to show political position, being as it is a real problem that involves a human life, the loss of biodiversity, being such a serious problem. It is important to understand the voice of those that can actually promote investments enough to serve to respond to the problems that may arise from these circumstances. That's why in this panel I would like to approach first of all, how can our panel members see these conversations that are happening around the world? Are we giving the right signs, the right motivations? Is there enough credibility to make those investments? What are the shades, or what are the instruments that we should implement so that actually this can happen? That is not only speech or discourse, but that we can actually realize that is potential in these sectors. And I would like to start by Sonia Jeeves. She is the responsible of sustainability in the International Finance Institute. Also, Natalia Nadia Malpartida, she works in EY, and she is responsible of the sustainability issues. And Mario Pardo, who is the CEO of VVVA in Colombia. The three of them have long experience and knowledge in the topics we will be talking about. Sonia, please, if you would.
opportunities. We've got to build sustainable infrastructure, fund new technologies, and carbon capture and storage. All of these things need new financing instruments like green bonds or hurricane insurance or debt for nature swaps like the ones that they did in Belize in 2022 to protect the barrier reef, or Ecuador last year to support the Amazon. So climate and nature projects have got to be commercially viable. They have to have risk-return trade-offs that make sense for investors in the private sector. Because at the end of the day, the private sector has a fiduciary duty to their own clients. So the returns on climate and nature investment have to be at least as good as traditional investments. And that's why the work of CAF is so important here. You guys have done really pioneering work, becoming the green bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, like 40% green finance target by 2026. That's amazing. That's going to catalyze private finance, and it's catalyzation that we need. So that's the carrots. Now let's talk just for a minute about the sticks, okay? So in some countries we have regulators that are using the financial sector as a policy lever. And what do I mean by that? For example, central banks, like the European Central Bank, are pushing banks and other financial firms to be more proactive in climate and nature risk management. So the microprudential level here, they're asking for better disclosure. You can't manage risk unless you understand it. You've got to have all the information, including on all the climate and nature risks that your clients have around the world. So that's a lot to ask. And finally, regulators can use tools like taxonomy and capital requirements to kind of steer private capital toward climate and nature. In the EU, for example, you have very strict definitions of what's green and what's brown. So a bank is expected to finance more and more green projects, less and less brown projects, and if they don't, they'll be penalized. That's another motivation, a kind of a stick instead of a carrot. So the last thing I'll say here is that the election in the US of President Trump has really changed the landscape for private sector climate and nature finance. US firms will still have some incentives, although Trump may get rid of some of them too. But US regulators are not going to use sticks to motivate US firms. That means US firms will have a big financial advantage over their counterparts in Europe and other places that have stricter climate-related regulation. So international cooperation and alignment on climate and nature finance is going to be much more challenging, at least for the next 4 years.
Muchísimas gracias, Sonia. Yo creo que has planteado un panorama muy interesante.
Sonia, I think that you are presenting a very interesting panorama about how the rules can be shared now, how the multilateral institutions can work together. I would also like to say that our target of 40% of green funding has been reached. That was for 2026, and we reached that in 2024, which has been quite satisfactory for us, seeing that we are contributing. But I think that you have mentioned some very important topics about how to work with the private sector. I would like for Nadia to be able to complement from EY. I think that you're working on many of these topics. Yeah, hello, good afternoon now with all of you. Regarding what we have heard, I would like to tell you a little bit how we see this topic in EY, that we are a consulting and auditing international firm. And what we see in the companies is that the climate and biodiversity strategy is actually now being embedded into gaining its place into the business strategy. We can see how these topics are not only talked about within the sustainability teams, but they are going to a higher point, where it's the investors, what is the committees of directors, the auditing and risk committees that are demanding from the companies to measure their impact on climate change and sustainability. And that has allowed to channel certain money into some projects, whether it's reforestation, and measuring the risk throughout the supply chain, which is also important because it means that the companies will be accountable for the risks and for the impacts that are generated along the entire value chain. That is exactly the dependence on the natural capital, the use of soil, exhausting the resources, etc. So that's very important. We are seeing that. We're seeing how this can be integrated in the entire organization and how this also creates cooperation. That is also something that was mentioned. A lot of this scientific knowledge, technological innovation, investment to be able to fight climate change and the challenges biodiversity has gives room to this cooperation, not only in the private sector but also in the government sector, because capacity building, I still think that is one of the weaknesses and the points to improve in our countries. So I think this is a good point of departure that will allow the companies in South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean to empower these objectives. Okay, thank you very much. I also think that it's very important to set clear rules that can be shared and understood by everybody. And in that sense, I would also like to hear Mario Pardo, that he comes from a very sensitive institution in terms of sustainability. So please share your view. Thank you very much, Alicia. And thank you very much, Kath, for the invitation, for organizing this panel, and for reaching this objective of 40%. We see the big work that you're doing in the countries. So congratulations. So I would like to maybe build on what has been mentioned before by Nadia and Sonia, with complementing two things. One is that we as banks are very important actors, but the most important actors are the businesses. The transformation of economy has to be led by the companies, and we as banks, we need to fund them. And the second point, and therefore the positive and negative incentives, like you mentioned, the carrots and sticks, as you said, are very important, that they start from the economy of the private sector. And of course, they complement with the financial sector. The opportunities have been mentioned before. It's a huge opportunity. Astrid mentioned this when she started her presentation. The numbers are extraordinary, and we have been doing a very good progress. We have been able to fund 300 billion euros in sustainable funding, number that we are very proud of. But when we see what we have to do, as soon as possible, like the minister said, we are just taking the very first steps, and we still have a long way to go. And in this sense, I would like for you to take this message. We are on the right path. I think we are taking positive steps, but they are not enough. So the incentives for the real sector need to take a big exponential leap to be able to reach the objective that we all wish for. Thank you very much. I think that what you're saying is very interesting when you talk about the businesses that have been set by the prior 2%. This has to be an approach that comes from the private sector, from the bottom to the top. And I think it's interesting that we can reflect about the fact if whether sometimes the international negotiations are too complex. The minister also has proposed to simplify those negotiations, because I think that there is one reality of the negotiators, another reality of the businesses, and how to reconcile them both. So I think that in many of the cases, these negotiation spaces, of course, are necessary, because the topics are a highly sophisticated variety of topics, and perhaps even if it makes a little bit more complex negotiation, but it's a finer and better agreements are reached. So I would also like to hear now Sonia, listening from her experience in IIF, some success story that can show that in sometimes, well, putting the concepts to the ground can be easier and more efficiently done. Any success story, Sonia, that you can share?
nature swaps, the Galapagos bond in Ecuador, the world's largest debt for nature swap. So it allowed Ecuador to buy back 1.6 billion of its debt at a very significant discount. So it's a great example of bringing the private sector into this type of financing and achieving nature conservation in the Galapagos Islands. And adaptation finance, too. It's not just the mitigation, right? So, for example, hurricane clauses in government bonds. So governments, for example, can postpone debt payments in the event of a natural disaster. So think, for example, last year when we had Hurricane Beryl in the Caribbean, Grenada was able to make a deferral claim for over 12.5 million US dollars in its debt payments on its bonds and also on a loan, 5 billion in a bilateral loan from Taiwan. So that was really effective there. And Mario, I don't know if you're going to talk about this, maybe the BBVA and IFC biodiversity bond. So I'll leave that to you to talk about, but also another great example here. JP Morgan Chase had voluntary carbon market projects, you know, in the Durango state in Mexico. That's nature-based solutions. And it also accomplishes things like job creation, watershed protection. So there's a lot of ways in which the private financial sector can be brought into this, including in reforestation. Goldman Sachs, for example, in the Cerrado region of Brazil, had the Restore Fund. They work with BTG Pactual on ecosystem conservation and restoration. So really, really promising initiatives here.
Muchas gracias. La verdad es que es un reto implementar esos instrumentos. Nosotros desde CAF hemos puesto en marcha algunas iniciativas en materia de certificados de biodiversidad, precisamente en temas relacionados con
biodiversity,
economía azul, que es
in aspects
algo que hemos
related to
empezado
the
y
blue
que
economics,
creemos que pueda tener un
something
gran
that we
recorrido.
have started,
Y también en
and I think that
conversión
it
de
can have a
deuda por
big
naturaleza
path,
hemos
and also in trading debt for nature, the swaps. We have participated in the biggest debt for nature swap related to a river that released $300 million for investment in cleaning the Lempa River and environmental actions. I think that that's what we have to do. But it's true that sometimes the country, and here also talking to Minister Navarro, we are not always asked for help in these topics. Sometimes the agendas are so complicated that thinking about instruments that can be more complex or have more intermediation costs can be complex. That's why we have to work all together for this to make it more general and simpler. And that's why EY can also let us know how they work internally with these topics, how actually they implement these kind of tools to be more sustainable. Yes, of course. I would like to talk about two aspects, two practices. One that is associated to the public sector, and within the public sector, the superintendents of banks and insurance in Peru, we work with a climate roadmap, an environmental roadmap that has allowed somehow to this regulatory entity of the Peruvian financial sector to align with commitments, with more international commitments, but in particular, having an internal training program so that those that actually oversight the businesses and the financial companies can have this knowledge about the risks and opportunities related to climate change and biodiversity in the financial sector. That's the first step. Then what we are aiming for within the superintendents is to identify and map the level of maturity of the financial system in terms of this analysis of climate scenarios, for example, and for this work that have been somehow voluntary can be replicated in the entire national financial system. And on the other hand, well, in our country, we don't have big regulations that allow for the companies to communicate that impact about how they are managing these dependencies on the natural capital, for example. We are considering the global existing framework for them to be a point of departure so that the financial sector companies can also disclose how they are managing the operational risks, but also within their investment and credit portfolios, and on the other hand, how they are promoting and advising their main clients in these topics. I think that that's something that came up in the end of the last year and has been very well available by accepted by Peruvian organizations. Something that we have done in EY in these work tables that would be worth mentioning. Excellent. Thank you very much. Mario, please, if you want to share some experiences that you think that have been successful. Yes, of course. Alicia, as Sonia has been said, I wanted to talk about the funding of the private sector to protect and recover biodiversity. Last year, in the context of the COP in Cali, we decided that it was the moment to try to promote the relevance of biodiversity in Colombia, because indeed, and also like mentioned by the ministry, we are convinced that what would allow us to move at the speed that we want is for the society to demand that, and I think that in Colombia there was a space to promote more diversity. We worked together with CAF for this funding, $50 million to fund biodiversity. And basically during the last 4 months of last year, this funding became actually a very tangible success story. I'm going to talk about something that we don't talk a lot, and it's a BBVA in Colombia. We have a training for executives for them to be able to offer funding. And that has been the funding with the most success in Colombia. In addition to the training, there is a high demand of our employees. They enroll in that training. More than 1,000 executives enroll in that. Then they started to have the conversations with the clients to see how we can fund biodiversity projects. And with the clients in Colombia, the projects that could fit in this definition of biodiversity. Unfortunately, a lot of them were not suitable, but what it had a positive and the difference between sustainability and biodiversity.
And finally, we have more than 60 projects with different clients that are in this financial process that are, let's say, under or that fulfill the different requirements that we have in order to support the biodiversity initiative. So here we're talking about more than 1,500 families, that the ones that we're going to be working with this biodiversity initiative. So in less than 4 months, where you have used this 150 million that CAF had provided us with, but we have also invested in biodiversity here in Colombia. So in just a couple months, it's just something that we've done, and that's something that I think we can see what we can do and how we can support the biodiversity in Colombia. Thank you very much. And I think that we are just delighted to be working with BBVA and to get to know how fast you have proceeded with all of these different initiatives, because we know how much or how long it takes to work with these carbon bonds, but with every single instrument that has to do with biodiversity, it is still very novel. And it is important to see how you have advanced in that sense. And with just a couple minutes that we have left, we are in a forum that is working in this pathway to growth in Latin America. And in the end, let's say, with everything that we've seen, and having in mind all the insights from different companies and the different banking institutions that are now adopting this environmentalist speech, I'd like to know what your position is in terms of whether you see if Latin American or the Caribbean can play an important role that can help the region to grow, actually based on this richness in terms of their environment, in terms of the nature that they have, in terms of these, let's say, renewable resources, food security, and of course, the richness that we have in our forests. So how can we make sure that this pathway of growth actually considers this environmental aspect, and that is not only something that is going to be in paper? So what can we do, and what else can we do in order to continue this sort of initiatives? So we'll move first of all with Sonia.
No, I would just say that two things, really. Governments and businesses across Latin America can continue the collaboration with development finance, with multilateral development banks to build markets, for these new instruments. We need these markets to grow. For example, voluntary carbon markets, that's another area of tremendous promise in generating revenues, but also protecting, forests and nature and so on. And finally, I think the investment environment is something to focus on, right? Because what we need to protect nature and fight climate change is global capital. Global capital goes where it's treated well. So the better the framework, the investment framework, the regulation, the legal frameworks in all Latin American countries, so the capacity building work, and you mentioned this as well, is tremendously important there.
Muchas gracias. Nadia, su opinión.
Bueno, solamente quizás para
Thank you very
también
much. Now we'll move
ir
on
terminando en una reflexión.
with Tanya. So I think I'd like to close up with a very brief reflection from the private sector. If we want to continue creating this value, not only for the investor, for the different stakeholders, but also for communities, the local communities, and for the different providers and the different collaborators we work with, we have to manage all the different risks that we have, but we also need to manage the opportunities, new business models, new services, new products, so we can actually value or we can actually leverage everything we have within the markets that we have at hand. And I think that if we are actually considering all of this, not only in these sort of events, but if we also call upon action to the public opinion, I think we're going to be able to potentiate the different outcomes that we may achieve. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Now let's move on with Mario. Mario, please go ahead. Well, this is a clear yes. Whenever we talk about sustainability and biodiversity, the Latin American potential is incredible. The transition to clean energies is just incredible, not only here, but at the global level. So here we have a lot of biodiversity. Most that have the biodiversity richness is in our territories. So this is just extraordinary. So we do have all the opportunities at hand. And it is true that we need to continue, let's say, doing what's right, doing our due diligence in order to, and even though we have a more volatile world and let's say less predictable world, we know that the United States agenda is going to pose some challenges, but I also think that it's going to pose some opportunities as well here in Latin America. So here we need to think about the strategic strengths here in Latin America, and whenever we talk about the value chains here in Latin America in terms of the food security. So that's something that we need to consider in terms of biodiversity and tourism and the energetic matrix that we have in the region. So I think that here we have huge opportunities, and I think we all need to pay attention to that, and we cannot lose track of everything that we have to do given the external noise that we may hear. Thank you very much, and I would really like to shout out to the participation of the ministry and Sonia, Mario, and all of the panelists in this forum. I think that we have drafted some very interesting conclusions in terms of what's the conversation like in terms of the public responsibilities with the private sector. And of course, we wish you all the best for this February session. Hopefully, you come to very important agreements in terms of financing and funding. And especially, we hope that the negotiations are not going to be focused exclusively on figures, but also in terms of what's going on with the growth models. And I think that in that sense, Panama is a role model for the region, and I'm sure that it will pioneer many of the initiatives that we'll see replicated throughout the region. So hopefully, together with CAF, we'll continue to increase our percentage to 60% or even beyond. And to the rest of you, thank you very much for your patience with all the technical issues that we had at the very beginning. Once again, thank you very much. Wish you a beautiful evening.
Is the new era of business philanthropy. We are, a little late, but this is the one that we're going to have right now. Change the social challenges of Latin America and the Caribbean in sustainable development opportunities. According to the Global Impact Investing Network, even though the region faces challenges as extreme poverty and persistent inequality, only gets 4% of the impact global investments. So how can impact investment be more effective in contributing to reverse this complex reality that affects Latin America and the Caribbean? What strategies can use family businesses to increase participation in funding sustainable projects? How we can measure the social and environmental project to bring more capital to the region? What success stories can we learn from? And replicate good practices to have significant change in the region. Capital will purpose the new era of philanthropy and impact investment. International Economic Forum, Latin America and the Caribbean 2025. CAF, Latin America and the Caribbean Development Bank. Okay. Welcome. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Okay. Thank you very much. I know we are a little late, but thank you very much for your patience. And what we're going to have right now, it's very interesting because I told you that this is the session on business philanthropy. And if you might think, I want to introduce our panel members. So I start with our moderator, Claudia Bolivar, a journalist from W Radio, that will be moderating this panel. Welcome. Also, Isabella Luxic, General Manager of the Luxic Foundation, Indigo Science CEO of the Botín Foundation. Inigo, thank you very much for being with us. Claudia Garcia, CEO of the Empathy Store, and Joanna Vamon, the CEO of the Foundation Internal Action, that also is joining this panel, the new era of business philanthropy and measurement of impact. Thank you very much. And I remind you that we are in channel 0 or in the corresponding channel. Okay, that's how we're gonna get started. Thank you and welcome. Okay, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Sorry, yeah, this is weird. Yeah, this is new for most of us, and well, it's kind of exciting also because it's a new experience that we hadn't experienced before. But okay, there is a phrase I want to start this important panel with, and is that what is not measured cannot be improved, and well, it's not improved, degrades forever. That's exactly what I want to mention here, because even though there are a lot of philanthropic initiatives, not a lot of times we know how much impact they are having in our communities, and in particular in Latin America, which is what we are here to talk about. Between 2018 and 2020, Latin America and the Caribbean received around $400 million in private philanthropy, representing 9% of the total global. 3 examples. Brazil got $64 million, Mexico received $52 million, and Colombia received $43 million. But out of those resources, actually today, can we see the impact? Can we measure the impact? And I want to introduce, for me, they are heroes because of the work that they do, my panel members, and they're going to help me. And so, best regards to Claudia Garcia. She is the CEO of called the Empathy Store, a wonderful initiative that we have today in Colombia. Very quickly, she will be explaining a little bit what this is about. To my left, I have Isabella Luxic. She is the manager of the Luxic Foundation, a foundation that is absolutely wonderful in Chile. I also have Inigo. Not yet. Okay, ladies first. Okay, so Joanna Bamon. She is a director, creator, a manager, a different leading positions of what is called Fundación Interna. That is an entity that gives a second chances, but she would also tell you exactly what she does and the foundation does and what she does for people in prison. And to my right, Inigo Sáenz, also the CEO of the Botín Foundation in Europe, in Spain. Absolutely wonderful work. So big applause to our panel members. Okay, good. And I want to start with Inigo. Inigo, I would like to ask you, can you measure the impact you are having on those communities, those niches, those societies you are investing on every day? Good afternoon, and thank you for your invitation. Correction, I am not the CEO or the president, I'm the director. It's very important because the CEO doesn't get a salary, the president doesn't get a salary, so in a foundation, so the manager does. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this forum. I think that it's very important that to answer to this question, the social and the philanthropic sector is considered. I haven't found aggregated data for Latin America, but in Spain, we represent 1.5% of the GDP. We are more important than the telecommunications sectors. We are anti-cyclical sector, and we are contributing, and we can contribute to the generation of wealth in a very important way. We have to stop being seen like just an ornament, like the good guys that give money away. No, we are a key fundamental actor. We are a social fundamental actor, and we have to make our voice be heard. And, well, everything can be measured, Paula. Everything can be measured. There was this joke before saying that, people say multiply 5 times 4,182. So what do you want, speed or accuracy? Let's not get obsessed with accuracy, but anything can be measured. Well, in an arts center that we have in Spain, we want to contribute to generating creativity, and we invented a creativity indicator with 40 sub-indicators of what we consider that it's measurement for creativity, and we can measure it over 100 years on a creative program that we are in different centers in Latin America. We measure the evolution of the variables we are working on and how they evolve in the control groups, in the control schools where we are not. Because we always need to have like the end goal. What is it that we want to achieve? The success of this presentation is not how many people are here, because if this is bad, I mean, the fewer, the better. It's not a joke. It's to what extent, actually, in this forum, we will be able to provide new creative answers to retake the path of growth. And if we don't measure, we won't know if we're doing things right or not. Or we are not going to be able to get others to help us. We are not going to be able to compare ourselves, for example, with public administration. So that we can see that what I invest in education, probably I provide more profit than what you invest. And I challenge anybody here that in 5 minutes we can find an indicator. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Isabella. I want to go with you with the same question. You, from the foundation, can you measure the social impact you're having? Hello. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much, Inigo. And thank you, everybody, for putting this on the table. First, considering that the civil society, in the position, I see this as a hinge or bridge within the public and the private. And I think it's important for development to consider this actor that is deeply connected with the field, with the community. So it's a very important point of connection. And therefore, the interventions made from the civil society on the different communities, it's indeed important to measure, because we are providing a service. In particular, foundations like ours that are implementing. We are implementing social services, so we are trying to cover a gap that neither the government or the private sector tries to fill. And in that sense, it's not only measuring, it's taking this point of views from the technical rigor. The point of the partial, from my point of view, has to do with the evidence, problem definition, and basing the theory of change, basing the origin of the program on robust evidence, and then measure the implementation along the process. We, as a foundation, we have today evaluation or assessment team, a big in-house team, and we do the full evaluation cycle. And starting from a good design or redesign, but always evidence-based, and always trying to find, the leverage for change usually exists already. For social factors, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's very clear what works and what doesn't work. And usually what is hard is to implement things correctly. So that's the stake. And where we should allocate resources is to the correct implementation of the designs. Usually designs are technically robust. So therefore we have to evaluate the design and the implementation to find the points for improvement, and implementing also continued improvement, of course, assessment of results, and in some exceptional cases where we are certain that our intervention has outcomes and impact assessment, to isolate our intervention and see if actually what I'm doing is generating that impact or not. That, like in exceptional cases, because it's very expensive to have a randomized impact evaluation, because it's very hard to find control groups, but it's important to do it when it's worth it. And therefore, following the prior cycle of evaluation to be certain that that investment makes sense. So I agree with Inigo. Everything can be measured, different things to measure things, but what is important is to find evidence, and always evidence-based data. That's what assessments is for, making sure that you are going along the right path. Thank you very much, Isabella. Now, one for Claudia Garcia from the Empathy Store, to be the one that tell us how it is contributing to growth in Latin America. Very quickly, for those who are here, explain what the Empathy Store does and how you are contributing in that growth of the region. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. The Empathy Store is a physical and online store that nowadays works with over 90 communities in all Colombia, rural dispersed population, helping ways to trade products, to be a window to find direct markers, and to have those populations to live in informality, going from the economy of livelihood to market economies. That's what we do in store. I wanted to some illustration, some photos, because this is about how to take again the path of growth. And if we connect this to a country like Colombia and to the challenges that Colombia and Latin America has in order to overcome those gaps, well, I wanted to show you here something very fast. Apologies. In the rural areas in Colombia, over 40% of the population are below the line of poverty. And then when you look at those existing obstacles that make it very hard to have some kind of a sustainable or sustained development, and to make these organizations competitive in those dispersed regions. One thing is access to potable water. It's amazing that even today, more than 50% of people in rural areas cannot have access to rural areas, because a lot of those communities are at the mercy of climate change, and this is work that is done by women and children that have to spend many hours a day to go and find sources of water. The poor condition of roads. 80% of roads in Colombia, of tertiary roads in Colombia, either they do not exist or are in poor condition. Something about the roads is not only about productive projects, because they are used by teachers, sick people, I mean, it's like the life of, and those roads prevents the community to do their work. Low access to education. It does not only have to do with the quality of teachers, but a lot of times access to education. Access aspects such as school transportation, violence. Unfortunately, this is a recent picture in one of the regions in Colombia that is going through strong war, that is the Catatumbo region. And this is a group of teachers, professors living, running on a school, on teachers, sorry, kids that are left out of school. So, in the education aspect, something that you were talking about, how important it is the aspect of skills and education in region. Here we see a lot of problems in terms of development. And well, I could keep going. Yeah, we could keep going. But I just want to end with something that is very important. That is that was also mentioned today, and it's the aspect of armed conflict and criminal groups in Latin America, in Colombia, because the regions and the territories are those who go hard through those realities. And the thing is that the criminal groups, they own the legal and illegal economies, and that's what's happening in a lot of regions. Something else that is amazing in the regions and is the lack of financial inclusion. So people are just at the mercy of loan sharks with a pistol on their heads without being included on a financial economy, informal economy, and that has a lot of repercussions in terms of economies for the people and also security. So these gaps make that if we don't regain this together, I mean, this is not just money for a project. We need to understand the problem, to go deep into the problem, and all of us build together very carefully the solutions. Thank you very much, Claudia. And it's very important for you to provide this panorama. And that was, as Inigo said, this is not something that can be over a year. It has to be long term, something that Claudia is using. And now Joanna Baumann from the Acción Interna Foundation to tell us how this everyday work that you do, because she is every day in the prisons in Colombia, how that work and how they can dedicate the entire life to that mission of internal action, how that can be reflected in a change for Latin America. How are you contributing to the region?
I think that all jails in Latin America are facing the same situation. In Latin America, they have a problem with the overpopulation. They are overcrowded. They have lack of resources, and I think this is an issue that is impacting us all. And actually, 12 years ago, I started working in jails with drama classes because drama was the tool that I had at the moment. So we started out with drama classes. We started out working with women, inmate women, and then with that, we took them out of jail so they could do their presentation out of jail. And these were women that were incarcerated. And then in the first row, there were their family, their sons, their daughters, and some other people that were looking at this wonderful opportunity. So once we managed to do so, once we managed to take all these women, inmate women, out of jail through these drama classes and through this place, then this opportunity became an opportunity for them, a second chance for all of them. This became a peace opportunity between the the carcerary population and also these inmates. So this is what took us to actually improve the quality of life of this population, their families, and also the young people who are part of the teenage criminal system. So through this opportunity, through this initiative, we started to work out with different social innovative experiences where we could create these sort of encounters. So with that, we created the first restaurant in the world in a jail where we would have this restaurant that would have guests coming over, and the inmate women would be serving this restaurant. Our reincidence index was out of 0%. So these are examples of social innovation that can or that have to be looked into that actually help people. So I think that that's the importance of these sort of programs for them to be replicated into some other initiatives. So after this, we created the House of Second Opportunities for people who recovered their freedom. And here we work together with their families in order to work with them and with their families in this reconciliation process. Well, Inigo, we saw some images where we saw some roads where there are lots of challenges in terms of what these foundations come across and how they can connect with in cooperation with other organizations, especially coming from the private sectors. But I want to go a bit farther in this aspect. How can we connect the public and the private sector in that sense? Or what do you think about that, Paula? Well, I think that it is kind of it has lost any sense to talk about the distinction between the public and the private sector, because if we're not doing any labor or if we're not doing anything with the social participation, then it's worthless. So that's why we have a program on biotechnological startups where we're using funds coming from families, and then we use these funds with some specific products that have been developed together with public institutions. And once we're part of this sort of cooperation, we become stakeholders or shareholders into this sort of initiative. So in that sense, it doesn't matter if it is public or private. What matters is the change that we're creating at the society level. And actually, what I see in this forum, and I see many people from the public sector here, and this is a very silly expression that we have in Spain, that it bounces and explodes in your face. But whenever it bounces, the public sector has to measure as well what's happening. So it doesn't have to do with an investment of $12 million in a specific program, but they also need to measure what's the outcome of that investment, what's the revenue of that investment. So if we see that, for example, it is best in the management of one or another stakeholder, it should be the same. So I think that the challenge of measuring the social impact has to be something that we all need to undertake. And it is impossible to look at ourselves to only assess what's going on inside. We need to assess it in a very comprehensive way and to see what's going on with the banking institutions, for example. We need to see what's going on with the banks in Colombia. What do the banking institutions want? They want to get a fast profit company, but we also need to see what's the social impact of it. So let's stop labeling all of this. We need to create systemic and strategic changes where we can create this cooperation and this ongoing cooperation process, or this ongoing exchange of ideas, because this means that we are going to continue, we're going to become sustainable in time. We're not in a rush. That's what we need to think about. We need to work together with foundations, associations, cooperative agencies, and all of this to be able to keep on growing. Isabella, what do you think? Or what has it been like in terms of the cooperation that you've received from the government? Because I'm not going to say the public sector, because Inigo has already said that we're not splitting bands here, but just the government. Well, Inigo, I'd just like to add on to what you were saying, that let's say that there are some other things that we need to actually deepen into, and this has to do on how we move from charitable actions, because here we're not talking about charity, or we're not talking about social initiatives just for the sake of being social. But I think that in this Latin American region, we need to see how all of this is, let's say, mediated, and it's been mediated by religion sometimes. But I think that the biggest challenge that we have right now is how to take these social initiatives to a professional level. And by having this professional level, we need to scale up our standards. We need to take these standards a level up. And I think that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years. And that's what we have done. We have integrated the user experience, the UX. And in that sense, we need to consider the same actions from different perspectives. So this was a private initiative, and we've seen some private initiatives, and that's useful. And why not to use it if they're useful? Why not to use them if they're useful? But what do you think? Don't you think that sometimes we use all these funds better than the private sources? Because sometimes we lack professionalization, but I think that we're not. Actually, we have a very good professional, but that's only my experience. Maybe in Europe that's experience, but in Latin America, I think we're still a bit behind. But let's say, going back to the Chilean case, I'd say that we haven't had any setback, but we have moved forward in the professionalization of our human talent. And in that sense, we know that we don't have the same revenue as some other sectors would. And let's say that we need sometimes this sector has or does not receive the same levels of demand or excellence. So that's why I believe it is very important to demand a lot from them, because they're leveraging some resources. So that's why we need to demand quality out of these programs. And that's why we need these programs to be impactful. So that's the way that we are going to make that these programs actually create a social impact. So I think we're still halfway through, and we have advanced a lot so far, but there's still work to be done, and we still need to continue responding to the different challenges that we have in all of these different parts of the world. And I think that the coordination is the best way to respond to all these challenges, so we can have a better coordination of our efforts in everything that has to do with these projects in housing or things like that, so we don't duplicate our efforts. So I think that we have advanced. We have made very important strides, but on the other hand, I think that the philanthropy has to be well thought for this to be useful. And Claudia, now talking about these joint efforts between the public and private sector, there are some specific examples. In Colombia, for example, where we have the empathy store, there's always been a promise of bringing water to this desertic region in Colombia, which is La Guajira. However, you managed to achieve something that was almost unbelievable with the Guajira mission, where you put together the government and the private sector to work together in order to bring a drop of water into this region, which is something that this country had been waiting for so long. So tell us how you managed to achieve that. Well, La Guajira, as you said, is a desert area in Colombia where the broadest indigenous population in Colombia lives. We have about 8,000 to 10,000 different communities living there with this problem of water scarcity. So from our platform, we found out that empathy is just a solution to indifference. And we sensitized lots of people, and we managed to bring water to a community from the high Guajira region. And then a very strong economic group in Colombia, led by a Val group, a banking group, that was working with this mission. They posed the question on how to bring water to more communities in Guajira, and they made a promise, and they wanted to bring water to this region. And very soon after, they found out how difficult it was. But today, it has become an example of achievement, because this is an example of transformative philanthropy on how an important economic group could work together with the financial group, with financial groups, or with the public sector to bring water to this region. And they managed to understand the complexity of this problem. And now they are ensuring not only access to water, but also access to other public utilities such as energy in order to have some sustainable development towards the future. Well, before moving into this panel, we were wondering how much of a power of calling upon voices we would have. So, in that sense, I'd like to ask you, what do you think would be the best way so people stop thinking that philanthropy are only those companies that are to have some economic benefits? So, how can we demand the private sector to invest in these sort of initiatives? First of all, we need to invest in communication, and that's something that we sometimes don't do. And sometimes they say that whatever we're doing in communication is not a social investment, and that's a cultural switch that we need to go through. And we also need to think about what do we want to tell people about, what do we want to disseminate, and how we're going to do it, and to whom are we going to disseminate this information to. So that's why we need to have a very well calibrated compass as to get to know all of this. What are those specific things that we are managing to do? Deep down, we need to be, let's say, in equal situations. Justina said it this: we don't have to be competitive, but the question is why. Yes, I want to be, my organization is important, but I need to be, we need to have competitive salaries so people want to work with me, because otherwise they're going to go to the private sector. Because how I said that, for example, we have a major of Santiago de Chile or Mexico City that is charging 10 times less than someone in a marketing company. That's impossible. That's unbelievable. So that's why we need to make our work worth it. Because here we're creating progress, we're creating opportunities, but we need to be bold whenever we are establishing these communications, and we need to be very transparent as well. Because whenever we have a wrongdoing by a foundation or someone, that's something that deeply harms what we do. And this is something that we heard this morning about trustworthiness, because this trust is the fuel that makes everything happen. And if we don't do it, let's say this would be self-made prophecies. So that's why I think it is very important to have a very good management of communications. And now going back to this, Joanna, I'd like to ask you, Joanna, how does función interna or the internal function work? Because we want to have an external impact, but whenever we assess what we're doing, how do we see those things? Because we know that we're not giving money away or things like that. Well, there's something very important here, which is that working in philanthropy doesn't mean that you're going to do it for free. It is very different to do this charitable work, which is something that I deeply respect, in comparison to having a high quality work. So quality versus charity. So for example, the restaurant that I was telling you about, the restaurant in Cartagena, what did we do? What do you think we did to have this high quality restaurant? We had the best chefs in Colombia who would donate their time to train these inmate women so they would have this resocialization and they could have this training, because this was not charitable. It was just something that we were doing with high quality standards. The same with the plays, the drama plays that I told you about. We have the best drama teachers and drama professors. So we had the participation of 12 of the most important drama agencies in the country. So if we want to have this result, that's the way that we have to do it. We need to have high quality training, and we need to differentiate between charity and quality, and we need to be competitive. We need to pay people well. in each of the foundations that we run. And especially in my case, where people prefer to support, let's say, different foundations, different initiatives, but they never want to fund, they never want to do this fundraising for inmates. But of course, we need to be very, very careful about it. Okay, and within this, within your company, those people helping you out with the different missions that you have throughout the different jails in the country, are they aware of what they're doing? Yes, they are deeply aware of what they're doing. Actually, right now, we have 100 people in my foundation, out of which only 30 of them have a contract agreement or an employment agreement, and 70 of them are donating their time. They're doing pro bono time. But this is a reality. It's not easy. It's not easy to run a foundation when you have these international cooperation agreements, and you need to find new fundraising sources. So you need to be self-sustainable. For example, we created our own label, for our own clothing label, that are self-sustainable, because living out of donations, I think that culturally speaking, Latin American, we're not used to having these donations. I don't think there is any foundation that can make a living out of donations exclusively. So that's why I believe it is important to have this public and private sector support, which in our case, it is very important. And in our case, it's been very important to have the support of the Ministry of Interior that has helped us out to move ahead or to make some important strides with these people once they recover their freedom. So I think it is private and public cooperation is key. And Isabella, in your foundation, you tell me if it is a cross-cutting spirit, or is it only the board of directors, the ones that are aware of what they're doing? Can you tell us how it works? Yeah, I'd say that it's been a principle for us to fall in love with the solution, but not with the problem. So I think that's what we've done. We have tried to switch our mindset in order to find solutions to the problems rather than getting stuck in the problems. So that's why we question what we do all the time. And on the other hand, I think that the organizational level, I think that we know that this is a risk. We do have this risk capital, but in that sense, we do have the liberty of innovating. Or, of course, we need to be responsible in this innovation, but in a small scale, and we can pilot different ideas. But I think that that's very important for us to think about how we can transgress all of this and how we can go beyond, and in order to achieve the result that we want to achieve. So that's been very important for us to think about how we can think about the development of the country, and maybe the future will go even beyond, but that's, let's say, right now we're thinking about the development of our country, and let's say we're thinking about every solution is problem-based. So we are responding to these challenges, and I think there is a very important challenge that we have in terms of the scale, how much we can scale it up, because sometimes we focus at the territorial level or the local level, but sometimes we don't know how to escalate it up or how to take it even farther abroad. And I think that technology could help us out to do so. That might be a solution, but I don't know. And I'd like to see the application of that and how to see that happening. And I think that's key. And this is something that the Americans have done it for a long time, because we are usually happy to import social methods. And yeah, I think we have managed to export. We have managed to export our educational programs. And in that sense, we are fully trained to do so, to train.
We have a model and implementation model, an impact measurement model, and I mean, it can be done. And I think that in these things, Yeah, I don't know if you were saying if doing was as easy as knowing they had to do. So, it would be just enough, go ahead and do it. And I'm sure that, you go and you make a model and you test it, as you say, trial and error. Come, I'm going to get it, I'm going to do this, and it works. And the second time it works better. And if you do what you have to do, what we need is the will to do it. That's a key. And we have to export that. Okay, Claudia, now that Isabella and Indigo mentioned the aspect of challenges, I know that the Tienda de Empatía is very much in the region, in the most distant regions of Colombia. What has been that challenge that has prevented you from growing and helping more people? Because you help even women to former combatants from the guerrillas. Tell us a little bit about that. Well, the challenges are many because, of course, these distant populations have themselves a lot of different bottlenecks. You find in the region some associations that have been actually supported many times by international cooperation, government, businesses, organizations that have existed for 5 years, 7 years, with accompaniment, with support, with high quality and wonderful products, but they face the problems of market access for all the factors we have mentioned. So an association, for example, in the backside of the country in Putumayo, that they used to grow coca leaf and now they grow pepper, top quality pepper, 250 families producing top quality pepper. But in any case, they face the obstacles, logistics, Today, they're actually asking for a bribe to be able to take out that pepper. So they face the armed conflict, the distances, and many other factors that make it hard to keep and to grow in those projects. I think that today or here, there's something internal for us. We have some principles of work, and those principles have to do with the fact that our development compass has to do with dignity of people. And for us, that's like our compass, because everybody, with no exception, should have a right to a decent life. And we all want for our kids to go to school, that when we get sick, we can access healthcare, that we can say what we get, what we think without getting killed. And that should be the compass for everybody with no ideology, and for it to be a way to work together. So there are many challenges, but in face of the challenges, we need to understand the size of the problem and getting together to overcome those problems. Yeah, we talk about challenges, but we also have some proven facts with data and percentages. And that's why, Inigo, when we were preparing the panel, you sent me two of the children, the flagships of Botín Foundation, one related to the public function, another one related to education. Let's talk about one of those projects. That today is the project that you can show as a success story, showing that you can have a long-term social impact. Can I say something else before? I knew you were going to do that because, yeah, because it has to do with what Isabella was saying before. I think that our big challenge is cooperation, and to grow is curious, and it's really pathetic that the banks have developed cooperation systems against them to provide credits for big companies or the construction companies. They work together. But we as foundations, we don't have cooperation models, but we're going to say, is this going to be yours? We're just about the logo. But then I give you money, but is this my program? Is your program? What logo is going to be bigger? I'm not going to use a Spanish expression that is not that pretty, but which logo is bigger, which logo is smaller? So we are humbly doing that, but we need to establish cooperation systems, communicate and publish so that others can use it. And now I go to what you say, because, and I don't agree with one thing that Joanna was saying. I mean, we are in the culture of philanthropy already. I'm sure that you probably don't know a Colombian family with money that they are not doing a social thing. This didn't happen 20 years ago. Say, no, it's the Americans. I mean, there is no wealthy family that is not doing something. The thing is that they want to do their thing, their logo, and, our step, our little mark. And on the other hand, there's much more money than ideas. It happens in the investment, but it also happens in the social world. If we have a good idea, if we have a good model, it can be done. And there's a bunch of people wanting to spend money to do that. The thing is that you have to prove that I don't want to come here and sell my book. If somebody is interested, okay. But for example, in education, yes, it took us 5 years to measure. We do 5-year measurements. And if what we want is improve empathy, emotional comprehension, creativity, resistance to frustration, and a lot of things that we might want to improve, you can measure that. There are standard tests all over the world. So we establish, you said, the control groups. In the past, we used to choose control schools. Now we choose groups in the school. Look, you go to a school, you say that you're going to act, but just in 50% of the groups, because the others need them to control. It's very hard. It took us 5 years to do this. So, but the peace that that actually gives you when you say this works or this doesn't work, and you dare and close that, and you say, for the foundations, it's hard to not to do certain things. There are things that it didn't work because, we wasn't that good. Can I compliment something? Yeah, please. Yeah, we just have an impact assessment that with negative results. Yeah, that's good. And those are things that happen. I think that in depth that makes us stop and think, rethink the solution. And I think there is responsibility in that sense of sharing the knowledge generated, because that can be and today we're doing policy briefs, but there are different mechanisms to do this, because you learn from mistakes and you can learn from others' mistakes. And I think that's important. Something like Inigo said, I think that is important even beyond the governments, and then you can try again and look at some things again and work a long time. You can have those times because the challenges are not immediate. Probably they are long-term challenges, and most of the problems you need to have that view and like patience to say so, to look at the investment over time. Well, negative assessment here and there sometimes hurts, but it's part of reality. Yeah, it's very good admitting that in public. Yeah, I cannot publish the results, but yeah. Okay, anything else, Inigo? I would like you to talk about the public function that I really liked. Yeah, it's true that our problem in Latin America, I always say that if I were going to be director or the president of X Foundation, I would only do initiatives that help improve how the public or the government entities work, because I think that is evidently all over the world that it doesn't really work well, and that not always democracies are producing what we would expect from them, and that it seems like that 100 years after World War II, we are still not able to agree. I think that the biggest challenge the world has is governance. Climate change is a problem of governance. Inequality, it's governance. Well, humbly, we have a program in Latin America to try that more of the best in what they do work in the public entities, and we are very proud. We have, of course, here we cannot measure the final impact because we do to contribute to the social impact of the region, because we are small, that we can only measure intermediate objectives. In this case, how many are in the public? 62%. And we are starting to have like control groups to say, it's a beautiful program that we have, and I invite everybody to do a little bit of research because it's beautiful. I would do things also to stop polarization. I think it's one of the biggest things, and it's in measuring the impact. But let's not forget about the love, because in depth we do this for love. It's good that we get equally paid, competitive But I mean, love is the issue. I mean, if we don't do this, this doesn't work. I mean, we shouldn't forget about this. Claudia, how can you gain trust? One of the biggest contributions, of course, is the international cooperation. How to make foundations and all these organizations that are changing the world, some from a small place, but others big. How can they earn a trust? What are also you doing in the start of empathy, and what's that message? Well, the first one is communication. We are relatively strong in terms of showing the stories that are in the territories. So that generates empathy and trust. Because first of all, we work with a lot of actors. We do that in a very transparent fashion. That is, everything is trackable. And in those alliances, now that you mentioned about the logos, that's one of our principles. Here we have to work without thinking that you are Messiah. It's everybody doing what you know how to do, what to do. Everything is equally important. And around the faith of the communities, this is not about your ego, so let's invent ourselves the faith of the regions, but how can we add in terms of the determinations, that self-determination that communities have over them. So that for us the key is always the trust of the communities, and then the trust of all the allies that always have the same presence in the territory, in the logos, and the same, that presence of knowing. It doesn't matter if it's just a little or a lot. What's important is to connect the efforts, because there's no worth in having a new computer room if there is not an IT teacher, if there is not an internet connection. And in each one of the things that you do and you see, if you are not adding to something existing, I mean, what everyone has to do around, it's very hard to see real impacts. Okay, Joanna, I also wanted to answer. No. I wanted to compliment. I love everything that Inigo says. Talking about the challenges that you were mentioning with Claudia, I think that the biggest challenge that we have in the foundation is stigma of the people that are in jail. When people leave a jail, the first thing that is asked when there is the criminal records, and that's as far as they can go. And there is not option, that then falling into crime again. And finding like solutions to those issues, we created in Colombia the second opportunity law. That is a law that probably can be replicated in many countries, that gives the tax and economic benefits to companies that hire former convicts. Because actually it's people that have already paid their debt to society, and that actually due to the legal path, because in our country it can take 8 years for that to be expunged. So those small incentives can be a small beginning, because of course, and we wish it wasn't necessary to have this motivation, but it's a very good first step for these people to come back to society, not only socially speaking, but formally in a decent manner. Okay, and that happens with a lot of vulnerable populations, such as the ones that we work. We are running out of time, but very quickly, Inigo, after this short panel, how can we engage more philanthropy in this small part of growth? So what is it? What is the final path that we want to have? Well, there's no like a very specific response. We need to just trust each other. Here in the panel specifically, everyone that has objectives that think that matches with the objectives that we have, stop us and talk to us. To work together, and not looking above the shoulder. Like those guys, they do pretty things, but they not do it as well as I do. We are all in the same world, and we have to listen to each other and trust each other. And please, let's get invited. Not me, okay, but people like us. Invite us. It should be still be taken into account and considered as actors, as important part of growth. Okay, perfect, Isabella. I think that there is an important need to invest more in implementing in operations. Much more expensive. As I said before, I think that design is good, but it's good to show with. I think that is important and to show that, and I think there's important space for more contributions to be provided in implementation, and that goes hand in hand with something that was mentioned, that was a cooperation clearly to have more capillarity, higher scope with others, and I think that was extremely important. And the public-private alliances is important. We have participated with that in Chile with the Ministry of Education, and we hope it gives good results. And other initiatives can have that possibility. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Just the names is like Inigo said, you have complementing ideas and achieve a common goal. Joanna Bahamon from Acción Interna Foundation, Inigo Sanz, Botin manager, the president, Isabella Luxic from the Luxic Foundation in Chile, and of course, Claudia Garcia, Executive Director of the store Empathy. So thank you very much. A big applause to you.
Okay, so how are you doing? So now, coming next, a very interesting panel with some majors. Latin America and the Caribbean create about 10,000 tons of solid waste, and it is estimated that it will get to 245 million of tons yearly with an increasing trend. With the new trend, more than 35,000 with 35 tons a day are not collected a day, which is affecting millions of people. Besides, between 40 to 45% of this waste are going to end up in wastelands open sky, which is impacting the way in which people are relating to it. In the region, we have more than 13,400 millions being invested in the region. The circular economy is a key solution that promotes their use of this waste and creating new opportunities for clean energies and green employments, which are the main challenges in order to implement this circular economy in the region? What sort of opportunities are there for the region in terms of economy and technology in order to have the better management of these solid waste? What are the best practices for this circular economy in the public and private sector? Economic World Forum, Latin America and the Caribbean, 2025. CAF, Development Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean. Now we kindly invite you to use your devices. Can you hear me now? All of you wearing your device. Can you hear me all right? Wonderful. Okay, so thank you very much for joining us once again. I know that we're a bit behind our agenda, but trust me, what's next is worth hearing. So right now we're going to start talking about circular economy, subnational governance, sustainable growth, and solid waste management. So to do so, I'd like to welcome to stage our panelists. So I'll welcome them to stage and I'll introduce them. Santiago Pardo, Chief of Subnational Matters for the Regional, Subnational, and the Caribbean sector, Andean and Caribbean sector. I see them already, but they're not hearing me now because they don't have their devices yet. We also have Pavel Munoz, Major from Quito, Daniel Cristin Ramos, Manager of Waste, Solid, and Liquid Drainage, Camilo, also the major from Bogota, and it is going to be moderated by Lorena Arroyo, who's the coordinator of America Futura. If you can hear me now, and we can get started with this session, I'll kindly ask you to quickly set in place so we can get started with this second panel. Okay, so now we have him, Lorena Arroyo, coordinator of America Futura, who's going to be moderating this panel. And we also have Ana Carolina Ruiz is also joining us, also a major from Quito, Ecuador, Pavel Munoz, and major from Bogota, Colombia. I'm sorry, we're having some issues with the headphones, with the headsets. So if this would be a very silent silence, and because it seems like we're not talking to anybody, but I know that you're all hearing me. Can you hear me? It is the channel 0, just in case. I could hear you before, but now I can't. Something's going on, sorry. It seems like you need to wiggle the wire a little bit. We now have Carlos Fernando Galan, Mayor of Bogota, Colombia, who's also joining us in this panel. So we have a lot of innovation for this panel. So we have a silent room here, and we're just trying to discover how to handle it up. We also have Pavel Munoz, Mayor from Quito, Ecuador, who's also joining us now. Lorena will moderate, and if she's already here, I'll leave it up to her. Please be welcome. And Santiago Pardo, as I said before. Okay, so it seems like we're now complete here on stage. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Please be welcome. I'm very pleased to see you all and to share this panel with people coming from different parts of our continent to discuss something that we've been discussing all day long in terms on how to help our region grow in a sustainable way, and now focusing on the management of urban solid waste. And thinking about the circular economy, what comes to my mind oftentimes is the quote by an Ecuadorian engineer that we interviewed not long ago. She said that Latin American people have brought this circular economy in their veins or in their blood forever. So I think it is important to go back to it and think about how from each of the institutions that you're representing today have understood the circular economy for the benefit of this circular of this region. I'm sorry. So we have an estimate of what the solid waste is on a daily basis, and there is an increasing trend towards 2050. And even though we have these concerning figures, more than 35,000 tons are not collected, and sometimes they end up in wastelands that are open sky. So this could become an important opportunity in order to create new employments. These open pit landfills are something that could represent an important opportunity for new employment opportunities or new innovative opportunities. So here we have Carlos Fernando Galan, who would I pass it over. Thank you very, very much. I'm very happy to be here to join you and tell you what we're doing in our city. Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll pass it over to Pavel Munoz. Thank you very much for having me. And now we'll move on. As I said, we have people coming from different fronts. Here we have Daniele Ramos coming from the regulatory entity from Sao Paulo. Hi, thank you very much and good afternoon. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. I'd like to thank CAF as well. I'm very happy to be here. Very good. So here we'll try to exchange in our Portuguese and Spanish, Portuñol as some people call it. And we also have the director of business development and Interese, which is a Colombian institution based in Medellin that has got operations throughout the continent, some of them in Panama, where she's going to tell us about waste management. So please be welcome, Ana Carolina. Your microphone is muted. Thank you. Thank you, Lorena, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Special greetings to my colleague panelists. I'm deeply pleased to be here representing Intereseo to exchange our experiences. Thank you. And last but not least, we have from the private sector, we have Felipe Pardo also coming from Colombia as well, who is the chief of Inter-American, Andean, and the Caribbean region for Tetra Pak, who's been working in the food industry. Thank you very much, Lorena, and thank you as well to my dear colleague panelists. And I'd like to thank as well CAF and its president, because I'm sure that we're going to share very important and interesting opinions in this panel. Okay, so right now let's start with the major offices. I will start with the major office from Bogota, Carlos Fernando Galan. So the circular economy and the management of solid waste at the urban level have been key aspects in the last years for the major office in Bogota. So within this framework, what sort of strategies do you have in order to implement this model and to enhance it as to engage both citizens, but also those people working in this urban waste collection? Well, definitely in Colombia, we have a public, private, and social sector awareness in how we need to switch the model that we currently have, which continues to be linear, so it becomes circular. So we're doing so within the framework, within a national framework that has got some limitations that for a capital city such as Bogota, so it can actually do it. In Colombia, just let me give you a brief context. We do have a public utilities law that says that this management of solid waste has to be conducted in line with the legal regulations in such a way that any company can operate in it without any sort of restriction. Of course, they need to comply with some requirements. Um, but also, given the characteristics of our city, in order to have a proper solid waste management, we need to have some exclusive areas that are going to determine where they are going to deliver this waste management, where they're going to deliver this solid waste. Bogota and Colombia has been one of the exclusive countries that has exclusively stated that it require that they need to have some exclusive areas for the solid waste management. And this is something that we started to do last year. And right now we're working on a new tender in order to establish some new areas where we are going to incorporate some other aspects that is going to help us out to transition from the linear model to the circular model. The bet that we currently have in Colombia, where we in Bogota actually have about 6,500 tons of solid waste a day. We know that we are recycling about, because of the official records, we are a bit hesitant about this. We are managing at 1,000 tons tons of recycling material. So, but the local regulation says that they have to be incorporated, but we're working on this. According to regulation, we say that it has to be taken out in a white bag, and when it is taken to the street, it is the recycler who is going to be managing this. So once the solid waste is put into a white bag, it is the recycler who is going to handle that. So right now we're trying to incorporate much better incorporative tools in order to engage these recyclers so they can have better tools for them to handle and manage all of this solid waste. And this is what we have, because here we have this, and unfortunately we have, let's say, the transport mechanism for these recyclers are of human traction nature. Some years ago we used to have some animals, horses, but now it is men who are, let's say, fueling these wheel cars. And this could be the integration of what we have here in terms of what we need to do. And of course, we're trying to comply with everything that we need to comply, but we need to also be aware of the conditions that our people are working in, because actually this is something that we need to establish so we can keep on working on this. That depends on the national regulation, of course, but they are the ones that need to authorize what's going to happen in this sense. Wow, that's very interesting. In terms of the regulatory entities that are key in everything that has to do with the circular economy in Latin America, but in the end, they cannot be understood out of the formality that we need to have. So I think that in 2016, it was established that they needed to have dignified life conditions. So what is there missing? What do you think is missing in terms of the regulation that you were saying out of these regulatory entities and this regulatory framework? Because of course, this is going to impact the economy of lots of families. And as I was saying, and many people in Latin America depend on recycling. This year, even though we continue to operate with the old scheme, we now advance with a new agreement with an organization with an organization of recyclers. And then there are some new challenges here. And sometimes we have many challenges because oftentimes recyclers are victims of organizations that are using them as to access some funds. So sometimes they will be paid twice or thrice their load, but this money is not going to be given to them, the recyclers, but to some other criminal organizations. So that's why we need to work that out, and that's why we're working out some formulas that are going to help us out to have a streamlined communication with these recyclers themselves, so they don't have any broker in between or any intermediation, so they can access the resources um, that are for them. So that's why we need to work with some specific plans. We call them the transference plans, where they are going to access these plans and they are going to improve the value chain. Wonderful. And just the last question before we move on to the major from Ecuador. So, what kind of things can be improved, or what opportunities do you see for the private sector in this scheme? Well, as I was talking about the exclusive areas for waste management, they are work together with the private sector. It We can also have a public representative, but the operators in each of the areas that we have are mainly private operators. And my idea under my administration is to keep on working with the private sector. Some people say that this should be managed by the public sector. However, I don't agree. In my administration, we believe that with the proper agreements in place and with the proper regulation in place, we can manage to have a good management of these solid waste. So our bet is to continue with that model, and that's why we have a new project or a new proposal to have new areas of waste management so the private sector can work that out. So this is something that has been done in both, however, it hasn't been quantified, but many of the private sector representatives have already included the circular economy or the circular management in what they do. And this hasn't been officially reported. So let's say that's something that is on the side. So I think it is important to keep on working with this streamlined operation with the private sector so we can keep on working in this circularity endeavor. And actually, I've talked with many companies that have already made some important strides in terms of the circular economy, and we want to continue doing so. Because on the one hand, we need to have this model or this scheme where we are going to have the participation or engagement of the private sector. And on the other hand, we need to see how we can engage some other mechanisms that are going to decrease the amount of solid waste at the same time that we continue recycling. Thank you very much. And thank you very much. And now we'll move on with Pavel Munoz, major from Quito, Ecuador. And you are committed as well with the circular economy. So could you tell us what's your strategy in that sense and how to engage the private sector? I'd like to go back and I'd like to go back to our greetings, and I'd like to go back to thanking our host country. It is wonderful to see all these flags. And I'd also like to greet all my panel colleagues. And I'd also like to thank CAF, which is sponsoring today's event. And now, going back to your question, I'd like you to think about forests. Because this morning we're talking about some of the challenges that we have in terms of how much we can grow. First of all, because we have some issues in terms of inequalities and some other issues. And also we have some lack of capabilities in our institutions. I'd like to add another element because I feel that there is some sort of the implosion at the national level, and then how much of a main character the capital cities might be. So in that sense, it is important to understand what's the key role of cities. So in the urban areas or capital cities, the circular economy has to happen no matter what. And in that sense, that's why. And in that sense, I think we'll share some challenges with Bogota, because we need to think about how we can have a green city and an intercultural city. So what are we doing to do so? We're switching our energy, our consumption energy consumption matrix. And of course, this is something that needs to be understood with the subway that we now have, because now we're switching the way that we used to understand transportation. We're also working with the landfills, because when I first got there, first we would have 5 megawatts. Now we're producing 9 megawatts. So, and we have also approved the first plan for the management of wastewater that we can now work with. And we are also working with the waste management, because if we some time ago we used to work with the recyclers, anyway we would end up with the whole thing in the landfill. So that was somehow worthless, so that or wasteless. So we're doing many things, and I would say that nowadays Quito is taking advantage of about 9-10% of their solid waste. And what we want to do now is to increase that benefit of up to 70%. It could be through composting or through some other resources or through some other ways. And finally, if we do it right, we'll be the first municipality in Ecuador for us to have this first association, this public-private sector association, so we can have a better management of it. And we are next year, if everything goes well, we would have it implemented by a private sector representative. Well, there is something very important that you have just mentioned when you talk about the circular economy and the waste management that has to do with education. So from the very beginning, every citizen has gotten very powerful or plays a very powerful role in that sense. But maybe in this region it's not as well known as it should be. But I'd like to go back to what you've done with the company of solid waste management that has been awarded with some prizes because of what they've done so far. So I'd like you to tell us about these initiatives and how these initiatives can promote the common citizen participation. Well, I'll explain very brief, but I think that childhood and education is our key in order to respond to the environmentalist challenges that we have. So the teenagers and children are going to be the true champions of this change of mindset. But because that could be one important aspect to have a better management of the solid waste. But on the other hand, we should be producing less waste. So let me give you an example. We're just trying to switch this reality. The World Health Organization says that the average consumption in terms of water, it would be 100 liters a day. In Quito, we were consuming 146 liters per person. So this 46 surplus is waste. And this is what we are producing in every intermediate city in Ecuador. And then we finish up in 141. So that means that our population decreased their consumption. So we have done an important bet on communication in terms of having an environmentalist component in the educational field in our schools. So I think it is important. So here we have this has to be understood in two specific moments with the climate change. The first one, the drought season, and the second one, the rain or the flooding season. So we need to adapt our mentality or our mindset to adapt to those two moments. And then on the other hand, we have these public-private partnership, the one that I was talking about before. I think that right now we have some important issues in terms of employability. So I think that this project has to do with that, to create new employment opportunities. Thank you very much, Mr. Major. And even though you're mentioning very important aspects such as the climate crisis that we're going through, because actually the two of your cities have been impacted by this climate change, but maybe in your specific cases, we've seen how critical these crises have become. But now we're going to move on to Daniel Ramos, coming from Sao Paulo. And I'd like to ask her about the particular situation, particular challenge that she's got in terms of having a correct management of the solid waste in a state that has got more 40 million people. So, Daniele, I'd like to ask you what sort of policies or instrument are you implementing from RCESP in order to make sure that the different municipalities or prefectures can actually comply with the solid waste management? Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to move on to Portuguese. That is very important at the economic level. So it is important to understand those processes that we have in order to have a longer life. And
And the entities that are responsible in the municipalities that are quite populated with small financial capacities and lack the technical capacity for the necessary that are related to the regulatory aspects that in lack of cooperations, 50% of the municipalities of the cooperation and no, they don't have enough money to cover all the money to provide adequate services and the investment along that. And the different problems go up. I mean, cover 31% of the municipalities that are in that position, and 2% basically, yes, 2% of the waste are recycled. So the state regulatory entity, it's they can't cover all the services of the solid urban wastes are managed by the regulatory entity that is independent in the administrative status, and so that we are not acting independently in all the municipalities. Thank you very much. And from the regulatory position, what indispensable positions do you think that need to be met to carry out that circular economy from your experience? What should be those conditions? Yeah, we have a national policy for solid wastes that are quite robust. Was written and published in 2010 and use like the best practices as a benchmark. Use a policy. I mean, it's beautiful in paper. Of course, instruments are quite important, provided, and it provides for responsibility of the companies for the waste, gives a priority to the waste management, and it makes it mandatory for the manufacturers, importers, and producers that bring that import, of course, to the concept products in the country, that is mandatory for them, and it will be implemented in including the management of all the waste, following the schedule of the disposal of the products and the containers, and different commitment signs by those actors and the government, considering all the difficulties to implement according to the different events. And then the government published the regulation in the national policy, including a credit for this packaging, for recycling the packages. In that way, the producers and manufacturers can reduce the waste into the country, depending on the activities, the services of waste management. So there are some difficulties to be able to increase the price, and for the productive sector, it's the possibility that actually they are managing the waste in a proper manner, that are the majors office, the different associations, the entities that gather all those waste, and also the entrepreneurs related to these sectors. There is an independent regulator that homologates the recycling credits, and that would be the payment of the producers and manufacturers to those entities that manage the wastes. And that regulation makes the, or its obligation for the waste management and the waste that have to be tracked with different bill of lading and in the waste management and waste transportation. In Sao Paulo, we regulate the public utilities and the management of urban public wastes for the commercial activities and residential activities, and we support the waste management through the participation in the project of structuring the concession of the solid waste management biddings for the concessions. Those are concessions that are mainly regional. So we act supporting 5 consumptions of municipalities in the government, in total 9 municipalities. These consortiums are consortiums that united to think solutions for the waste management, even granting regionally the service, thinking that by themselves it wouldn't be possible to have the connections necessary or for the investment necessary, but jointly they can share those expenses and make it feasible technically and financially. So we have been supporting these consortiums, these joint ventures, provided with technical support, defining the indicators and performance and metrics, so that the wastes in the long term, we have contributed to make the service regional. And we have some technological roadmaps for the waste, in order for them to follow the metrics for waste management at the national level. We have a metrics of 48% of the, we have metrics for 48% of the waste in the country, for all kind of waste, including energetic recovery. So that technological path, including composting, resupply, including also the dry wastes, and also the utilization of biomethane generated at base of biogas in the sanitary landfills, have encouraged as a source of energy. We just authorized last year the construction of plants to use biomethane is generated in the central region to make it like the biggest, the second biggest one in the country, in the part of the all the grid of gas of the country. Thank you very much. And thanks to that, so it can be initiated. So we are going first to ask you, Ana Carolina. As we were saying before, what are the financial, social factors so that the solid waste management is successful? And on the contrary, what are the main barriers that you face? Well, for over the 25 years of experience that we have in solid waste management in 7 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, such as Chile, Ecuador, Peru, Panama, Salvador, Honduras, and Colombia. That is, in Colombia, we have understood that the relevant factors, in particular in this connection between the local governments, the central government, and the private businesses, which should be aligned for what the users need, that is a quality or a high quality services. Second, the financial and the legal that needs to be guaranteed, because through public policy, it was mentioned by the mayor of Bogota a moment ago, we can guarantee funding of the basic structure of for solid waste management. In Colombia, we have achieved a model through the regulatory entities, and in Colombia, we have been able to achieve that 85% of the funding or resources to finance the basic structure comes with the user's utility payment. But in Colombia, we are in the next discussion, because we collect that from the users through their bills. And in Colombia, we're in the next discussion. How can we find projects that go beyond towards a circular economy? Not all the countries in the region are having the same discussions. There are some countries that are still just understanding how to collect the money. Daniel was saying that a moment ago, to fund the service. So that is extremely important. And well, with everything that I just mentioned, I would like to give an example that integrates all those factors. We, in alliance with the Colombian government, in San Andres Island, that is an island located in the Colombian Caribbean with 26 square kilometers, 70,000 inhabitants, we installed the first energetic appreciation plan that Colombia has. It's actually, we are proud of that, because it aligned the private sector and the public sector. And over there, we are generating 1.2 gigawatts out of energy. And of course, there's this limit of space. We are saving the useful life of the landfill, and a very important environmental effect, because we are reducing the greenhouse gas generation. Okay, very good. And in connection with that, I would like to ask, what innovative factors, how are you connecting with technology for the waste management and to implement circular economy? Well, there are technological challenges because most of the technologies available come from Europe, and they come mainly from the United States. And we in Latin America, we don't have very good practices of sorting out at the source. So when there is this mass of solid wastes that is like a little bit of everything, you can even find automotive parts. So the challenge is how I adapt the technological process so that this technology works, and how I close that gap of the users so that they can start to sort out. So a lot of work to be done from tracking. We are wanting to work on that transformation of the solid wastes, and open to work in team with the public sector to achieve that, because we see with hope the future of solid waste in Latin America. And something that makes me curious when you're working in so many countries in terms of environmental education and from the point of the project of recycling, do you see any difference? Any other countries that have made more progress? Yeah, I think that in that aspect, we are facing a big challenge in all the region. All of Latin America and the Caribbean needs to take action in terms of that aspect of the behavior of users, because we have not achieved those degrees of separation at the source or sorting out of the source to be able to work with the waste as a waste flow as we see in Europe, in Asia. That there is this one flow for organic waste, another one for plastic and cardboard, etc. But well, the idea is to work on that aspect. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And now we're gonna have solutions with Santiago, because if we talk exactly about that, when we talk about circular economy, we work about the first R, that is reduce. Yeah, from the Tetra Pak, it's one of the objectives that you have, reducing the use of plastic in the materials that you use for your containers. Can you tell us a little bit your policy about that? Yeah, of course. Lorena and everybody, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think that it's important to highlight the work of the companies in the private sector. Not only we as producers of in the package containers, also Tetra Pak is a company that has a circular economy in its heart, in its DNA. Swedish company, 160 companies, that even before all this circular economy was trendy, it was in our heart, in our soul. So our containers are basically 75% contain of paper fiber from certified sources that come from renewable sources certified by third parties. And the barriers that we have to guarantee the acceptance and the duration in the long term use every time less and less polyethylenes, every time less from fossil sources, and plant-based sources every time more and more. So in that sense, we are reducing also the utilization of fossil fuels. It's very important to talk about the design. From the very beginning, the majors, you guys have said everything. In the end, we have behind us, the image. So in Tetra Pak, we have worked from the very beginning, and we have invested. We invested around 100 euros per year in designing our containers. This is a happy coincidence that we have Tetra Pak here. Not only in this panel, well, we have alliances, and I'll talk with the convention center. We have this, and our containers are designed to be use every time less and less those materials that are hard to process in the post-consumption, and every time more and more lighter in using paper. So that's one of our main sources. The other thing that I want to highlight is where the containers, where it's in the containers, usually food. Also, sometimes the food ends up in the landfills. So the wastes is around 8% of the greenhouse gas, and our container solutions make it possible to minimize that waste of food that doesn't end up in the landfills. Okay, under that scheme, Santiago, how do we as consumers engage? How do you see that from the company? Perfect. I think that's one of the key aspects that was mentioned in the panel. We need from the beginning to the end of the chain to work all together. There's no point in having the infrastructure regulation, having the producers, if the consumers themselves don't have environmental awareness. I lived in Japan for 11 years, and when I came back to Colombia, after that, of course, it was a shock. And you know that very well. Even though we have some regulations, the consumers in our countries in Latin America are still lacking a lot of awareness about sorting out of the source. We work, of course, as providers of container solutions with our allies and with the governments, so that every time the consumers are more environmentally aware. We have different programs like like the Happy Box in Peru, or your paper counts for. where we try to make consumers every time more and more aware about this circular economy that affects us all. Okay, thank you. And that's why exactly I wanted to ask you, how do you connect with other stakeholders? I don't know, you have an example you can share. Yes, of course, many examples. The first thing is that we participate both directly and through associations in different countries in Latin America in the development of public policies. We are an actor, like many that are interested in having the right policies. And second, we have alliances with all the different stakeholders in the chain, with NGOs, with local actors. We have, for example, one in Bogota, the massive transportation system, Transmilenio. We have a campaign where, when returning the Tetra Pak containers, they are given some extra money for the public transportation system. In Quito, we have worked with the waste management company, and we have also allied with the food producers. We are very interested in the past consumption of our containers, of course, include these principles of circular economy. I said before that 75% of our containers, it's paper containers, and the remaining, it's a polyethylene and aluminum that is also recycled, and that in the end of the day ends up being used, for example, for the floors or some. We work with the mayor's office of Machu Picchu, with the city hall, for our containers to be turned into selling. More than 2 million containers were converted into 500 ceilings in Machu Picchu for 500 homes. So, I mean, I want to insist on what I said before. All the stakeholders in the chain have to work together. And I don't want to stop, of course, mentioning the alliance I have with the CAF. We just formalized an MOU with Tetra Pak, with our colleagues in the with the CAF, where both entities, the bank as a leader, multilateral leader of development in the region, and Tetra Pak with that environmental awareness, working together with allies such as the municipalities. The mayor of Quito was saying that because every time are more and more important, the municipalities, to have this circular economy action, sustainability, and better development for the citizens. Thank you very much, Santiago. And to talk, because to end, because we are short in time, I will ask to open a question for everybody. I know that the mayor is in a rush, he has to go back, but thinking a little bit about what each one of you mentioned, the experiences that you have heard from the other panel members, what opportunities do you think that there are right now? Why can we, or where can we go in terms of waste management in each one of the municipalities or institutions? And what technological paths do you think that we can think in these moments? And if you have been inspired by something in your partners.
I'd say we're living a very special moment right now and taking advantage of the name of this forum in terms of growth, because we see a specific trend in some other places around the world in everything that has to do with sustainability. That's what we see. For example, what's going on with the United States today and their decision to get out of the Paris Agreement, we know that that's going to have a specific impact in some specific sectors particularly. And that's an important challenge that we all need to think about, because whenever we think about the circular economy, I think that with the proper incentives and with the proper joint effort, I think we can move into a factor of economic growth. But we need to engage the pertinent stakeholders. We need to engage the private sector, and we need to engage the public sector as well, and they need to become relevant in that sense. So I think that right now we can take advantage of some of the experiences that we have in Latin America and the region and the Caribbean, so we can actually navigate these turbulent waters that we are going to be going through with this new situation that we see in the north. So we rather see this as an opportunity instead of as a challenge for the integration of our people. So, what do you think? Uh, what do you think in terms of these troubled waters? When I think this is an opportunity, but my concern is that this is one of the last opportunities. Actually, when I heard you, Lorena, I thought about one of my professors drawing a stick person and making just a picture in the blackboard. And then he told us that sometimes we have a single opportunity before us, and sometimes if we don't take advantage of them when we have them, then they're not coming back. And I think that this climate change is an opportunity, and hopefully the idea is not to waste the last opportunity we get. And a specific case in my major office, I decided that this 2025 we needed to complete actions that were going to face this climate change. And of course, this is going to give us some sort of a comprehensive understanding in the sense. And then finally, after everything that my colleagues have already said, I think that this circular economy is worth having a circular operation as well. So if one piece of the engine fails, then we need to get to know what to do next. Because of course, if, for example, if in with the recycling work, if one of the operators doesn't work, the next one needs to work. How are we going to split the solid waste apart? So if and how are we collecting in a differentiated manner, and how are we going to channel it down, and how we're going to seize all of these opportunities? But if one of the parts of the engines uh, fail, then we're going to have issues in the rest of the cycle. So that's why we need to have policies that actually favor these issues. And at the municipal level, at the municipality level, we need to be coherent with the national level. So, for instance, if we don't have a national policy, because sometimes we lack this tax paying culture in Latin America, but this has to come together with some specific taxes. So we need to have all this tax paying together with the political will that has to be, let's say, something that has to be disseminated by the media. And I'll finish with this. The media should be willing to collaborate with the government decisions, not only because of the economic incentives, but also because we are, let's say, adding value to the educational dissemination strategies that our government has. Of course, yeah, that's true. We all have to play our due diligence in that sentence, in that sense. I'm from Brazil. What can you tell us? And especially because of everything that I've heard out of what my colleagues have said, I think there are multiple situations that could take advantage of this, especially in Brazil, specifically for consumers. That is key because we always talk about that on why it is necessary to work together with those consumers so they are part and they can engage in these processes. And so we can also see the necessary political changes so we can see an improvement in the public utilities. I also see an important need for us to work around the tax paying mindset so it gets stronger and so it responds to the recycling needs as well as the reincorporation of the solid waste to the productive cycle. So, for example, in Brazil, we have a, a tax we have a tax issue that is that is not motivating the investment in this sense. So, for example, last year we have a law being drafted that would make it more difficult to work with the solid waste. So, in that sense, it'd be more difficult to work it out with the solid waste that was created or that was being, let's say, discarded in our own industry. And then on the other hand, it is important to regulate the public utilities. So that's why it is important to think about how to charge for all of these services. So that's why I believe it is important to charge or to have some specific fees for those services so we can have enough resources in order to implement those improvements or those changes that are necessary so we can have the reverse logistics so we can hold every stakeholder accountable for what they do and the solid waste they produce, and how how the solid waste is going to be reincorporated in the productive chain. So that's something that we've seen in Brazil, which happens through the recycling loans or recycling credits. So that's something that we hope to keep on working on. Here, opportunities are endless, and we can make an opportunity out of every single action. So we can see all these things and these different solid waste material to be incorporated back into the productive chain. So I believe that the challenge relies as well on funding. We need private and public funding so these projects are feasible and doable in time in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in that sense, the public sector, the private sector is willing to to play a role in it, in this circular economy that we are all longing for and that is actually putting us together in this panel today. Thank you very much. So we'll close up with your reflection. Yes, I would echo by saying that we have opportunities everywhere, but it is also important to align the regulatory entities together with the public and private sector as to increase the investments that are addressed to have a better treatment of the solid waste. So even if we don't have any investment, any specific funding, we have the support. So we can better take advantage of the products or the materials that we have, such as it happened with the post-consumption of some materials. So in that sense, I think that CAF plays a key role as to fund public and private representatives as to put together all these elements in a let's say in a well-functioning machine. So as you see, we have multiple opportunities, and as you could see as well, we are willing to collaborate. So that would be my main takeaway. I'd like to thank Carlos Fernando Galan, Pavel Muñoz, Santiago Pardo, Daniela Garda, and all of you for joining me in this panel. Thank you very much. All right, so as the saying goes, the last ones will be first. So without any further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Paula Flores, who is the manager at CAF, and she'll have a very interesting conversation, and I won't tell you with whom because she'll be in charge of running the introduction. So, Claudia, the floor is yours. Well, without any further ado, having in mind that we're running out of time, I will get to it right away. Can you hear me? Wonderful. So today I'm pleased to introduce someone who is a visionary himself in Chile. I'd like to introduce Daniel Dakar. With more than 30 years of experience as an entrepreneur, he's walked a long journey ever since created Globe in 1993, a group of companies that would integrate systems for outsourcing services in key sectors such as transport, automation, retail, and security. But Daniel is not only an entrepreneur, but he is also a bridge builder. Since 2002, he's been a source of inspiration for new entrepreneurs. In 2007, he took his passion to the next level by having Start Your Mind Up, or Emprende tu mente in Spanish, with a new ecosystem of entrepreneurship. His goal was clear: to make out of entrepreneurship a clear tool of social mobilization, a clear social, and also a clear social engine. He's also a leader. He's the general manager and CEO of Vendomatic, but he's also hold some very important executive position in different foundations, such as Foundation 2000. And he's also part of the board of directors of Confo, and also the board of director of the university, of one very important university in Chile. His job has been very well awarded, such as the one of Entrepreneurial Product of the Year, and some others, such as the very special award by ICARI. Today, we are pleased to hear someone that truly believes in entrepreneurship and that truly believes into supporting others to make their dreams come true. So please let us welcome to stage Daniel Dakarim. Finally, last but not least, the last talk of the day. Thank you very much. Wonderful. I'd like to tell you a bit about what it's always about. I'm a business person, so I have vending machines in my country, in Chile. I do have tolls, like road tolls, and I also have parking meters, and I also work with loading carts, like for the transport system. But at the very beginning, I it wasn't the same. I was the ugly dog. I was the ugly dog at my university, at college. I was the ugly duckling. But let's say that I knew what to do, but I knew at that very moment that I wanted more people to start their startups, or to be entrepreneurs. But 20 years back, no one would talk about entrepreneurship. They would say that there would be business people, or that there would be executives, but no one would talk about entrepreneuring. So they would say, like, if you want to start something, you can start an engine, you can start the lights, or you can start something else. Um, and so at that moment, I really wanted to change their mindset. I really wanted to change what they would do. It wasn't all about the money, but it was more than that. We wanted to do things well, because being an entrepreneur has to do with doing things right. You can do you can be an entrepreneur while being a priest. You can be an entrepreneur doing whatever you want. Let's say that you make things to work better. It's a life attitude. For example, if you are the organizer at a soccer championship or things like that, that to me means being an entrepreneur. So I started to do what I knew what to do. So I knew how to start businesses. So So that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. And that was me. That was just trying to insert what I knew what to do into everything, into anything that I would do. So sometimes I would wonder if I had to do some things, and sometimes you don't use your talents until one priest told me that I couldn't let, or that I had to actually make use of what I was doing, and that I had to make the best out of it. So if my power was enlightening others, then I would have to enlighten. And this, of course, has got a trade off to it. So I needed to actually leave some money out to do something else. So that I would often question myself into this on whether I should do it or not. And then in time, I discovered that entrepreneuring is a wonderful tool of social mobilization, and it is very flexible. You can actually mold it up, you can actually work it out in as much as you want, and you can get as far as you want. So that's why I started to work this out, and I started to understand that this is a tool of social mobilization. And then in time, it got fueled in time, because sometimes people believe that it's very unlikely for you to do something here, or they believe you're an alien because you're doing something no one else has done before, and or that you're trying to understand the market in a different way. But let me tell you that we are just like every other human being. We're not aliens. We're not, let's say, nothing's wrong with us. I don't know, maybe some people would say that we need some medicine. I don't know, with different milligrams, 38, 48, or the Bach flowers, or any of those medicines. But trust me, we are just regular people doing regular things. But we have this energy, and we need to channel this energy down to our purposes, to our goals. And what I have seen what I have seen so far is that it is very difficult. Yes, it's tough, and it's challenging, and you may wonder on whether it's worth it or not. But honestly, I believe that this has been the most challenging thing I've ever done, but I would not change it for anything else in the world. I would do it all over again if I had to. And and trust me, you become more and more intelligent as times go by. But for example, and that's something that you see when you're back in college. If you don't know how to do something, then your friends can help you out, and then you can all grow together. And that's the way that we do, or that's what we do with startups, or with this, or with new entrepreneurial ideas. And whenever they say that you need to motivate, that you need to be a leader, or things like that, that's not the case. Because trust me, the first 20 years of entrepreneurship are the years of terror, are the years of horror. And trust me, this, you're not gonna have a good time. But you know what? You can just leave it all behind, because talent is everywhere, but opportunities are very rare. So that's where I started wondering, how can I make it so everyone gets their own opportunity? Because trust me, I come from a very humble family. I am the seven I am the seventh child out of 9 kids. So it was not easy. I had to go to public school. I didn't have the chance to go to a university, and then I was wondering how to make things possible. And so I started to create a method. And then I went to some of the methods that I was taught during college. That was the first the 4 P's of the entrepreneurship. First one, you have to be passionate, like passion. You have to be passionate when you're in your marriage, right? You're married, right? Of course, you need to be passionate. But in marriage, you need to be passionate. You need to be in love. And raising your kids, raising your family needs a lot of passion. And whenever you have an entrepreneurial idea, you need to be passionate about it as well. Many people may ask you if you're not tired, and the truth is that I'm not tired. Maybe I'm hyperventilating here, but I'm not tired. So this mechanical repetitive action, when you push and push and push every single day, it helps you out to keep on growing. For example, if you want to see, if you want to check on absolutely every single detail, so they come here. For example, if you can convince people to do some things for you, that's perseverance. And that's what you need to have.
Also, the patient needs to understand that things come in time. Money comes as a consequence of doing things right over time. I mean, the easy money, the only thing that it does is bringing you problems. So I remember back in my days when you had to record the song. Nowadays, they just record a song, they send it to Spotify, and 2 weeks later, it's the same song and it's all over the place. So, but in our days, first you had to go and buy a cassette, then you have to break it, and you have to classify your cassettes: slow music, Argentinian music, right? Then you need to used to write the name to the cassette. Then you have boxes, and when you go to a party, you would take your cassettes. You were like the idol because you would have your own music. So when things, cost, you enjoy them much more. And those are the details. Today in my desk, I have an cable organizer. For 20 years, I didn't have it, but it's really nice enjoying those little details because you enjoy them twice. And prudence, understanding that you have to move little by little. Things take time. You need to grow little by little, and I think that's those 4 P's have taught me a lot. So that I'm never in a rush. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit what this is about. In 2007, we would go to a restaurant with a group of entrepreneurs. I was the oldest, and we went to a restaurant. It was full. And then we would say, okay, can we have a barbecue? Let's go ahead. Let's go to my house. It was January. My wife was on the beach. I don't know, 10 people showed up in my place. Next year, one of the entrepreneurs told me, Daniel, are we having the barbecue? What barbecue? The entrepreneur, let's go ahead and invite a couple of people. So I invited some friends from college. They were managers, companies, Falabella, Ham Center, and we invited entrepreneurs. And it was really nice for the entrepreneurs and also for those managers. Then year 3, like 100 people in my house. So it was not enough food, etc. And then year 4, we said, no, we were doing it in the Gardens of Mercury and like 500 people. Next year, once again, like 1,000 people. Yeah, but it was... So we had to leave the Mercury Gardens and we went to another park. And what happened? I don't know, 2,000 people. We didn't have enough for food. I would get everything for free with friends. So a friend told me, let's go in 3M. And in 3M, it was big, and we started to put a tent. And we started with the friends to give talks. And we, it was a little bit more formal now. And we started to shape this that was called the Entrepreneurs Barbecue, listening to people that was a little bit ahead of those entrepreneurs to inspire them, to give them energy. And that's how it started, and this moved along. I remember that it was just, we would have stands of entrepreneurs where they could show their innovations, their products, and it started to grow year after year. What would happen is that entrepreneurs were on the one side, entrepreneurs were on the other side, because how can I have them to talk to each other? So we had a round table with a lot of entrepreneurs and business people and entrepreneurs, for example, about retail. And every 4 minutes, they would, like the hot date or hot state. And this started to work. We started to connect people. I would be outside of a 3M and I wouldn't let people leave. I didn't want them just to hand out cards. I wanted them to connect to each other. So this started to move. And 6 years ago, we turned into a nonprofit foundation with 9 people working full-time. Last time, we had 9 hectares in the Bicentennial Park with a little bit more than 45,000 people. And I'm gonna show you an audio because this does have an audio because this is the last year's event with audio. And this is full of good ideas, entrepreneurship ideas, and a lot of times what they need is access to markets. So these kind of spaces, when you can have these things, I think that is a key. This that we are doing, and I'm very happy now that we have these very good connections. So nowadays we are the entrepreneurship, investment, and innovation, the biggest encounter in Latin America. And honestly, all of you are invited. It's free. You can go and you can be and you can attend and you can have a presence. And what I tell people is that when you work together with patience and with willingness, over time you can achieve anything. So I ask everybody, how big do you want to be? Where do you want to reach? Yes, set your goals. So probably more corporate executives, or do you really want to change the world? And that's a matter that each one of you has to wonder and ask yourself, when do I connect my personal purpose and I do what I really have to do? So you are all invited. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope to see you in November this year. See you around.